Dun, dun, dun. It feels like season 16 has snuck up on us, despite it having been on the calendar for a while. So, Mike, I don't know about you, but it's like, holy crap, we're recording already.
It feels like we just recorded the last episode just like a week or two ago.
It can feel that way sometimes, yeah. Last season ran a little later into December than we normally go. So that did have an impact. But it also feels like there's just been a ton of Dragoon stuff going on. So it's, hey, what's one more thing? We'll go ahead and throw the podcast on there too.
That's right. Why not?
Well, a lot of that has to do with the ACDC, which as we are recording this, just finished 2 days ago. So it's barely 48 hours behind us. And it was a good time. We had fun. We just under 100 people for the weekend, which is a solid crowd. That's right in line with our normal kind of average for an ACDC. We seemed a little lighter on the total number of events this year, especially on Sunday. Part of that was because we ended up with some GMs with some issues popped up. David Thompson ended up having to cancel the whole weekend. He had something come up with the family he had to take care of. And then we lost a couple of folks for some Sunday things because they had scheduling conflicts with, suddenly had to deal with work stuff. The events that we did have, though, had pretty large attendance for the individual. Like we had a tutorial, a learn to play GCACW kind of seminar, and then we broke folks up into a bunch of individual tables for them to play great campaigns. And that one ended up with 18 people in it or something. I mean, it was a big crowd. So that took up a bunch of space on the agenda. The Kriegspiel session went really well. Bruce's Air and Armor and NATO sessions. I mean, it's hard to have a bad session with Bruce as your GM. So those all went really well. The Space Force guys, Littoral Commander Space Force, ran 3 or 4 sessions, and they were pretty well loaded. And for anybody that missed the news elsewhere, Littoral Commander Space Force is now on pre-order with the Dietz Foundation. It officially moved into pre-order, and we were the guys that got to break that news as a part of the happy hour, as part of the welcome happy hour for the ACDC. We had Aaron and Austin, who were the designers, on there with us, and it was pretty cool. So, Mike, you should have ditched the family and hung out with us for the weekend.
Yeah. So what is the most used platform for these games? The Tabletop Simulator, Vassal? It
varies year to year. It's either Tabletop Simulator or Vassal, depending on the games we happen to have that year. This year we had all the stuff the dudes from Catastrophe and Snafu and the Littoral Commander games were all in Tabletop Simulator. Air and Armor and GCACW were in Vassal. And the China's War game that Andrew did on Friday was in Vassal. This year, it literally depends year to year who volunteers to do what, but it's one of those two that will be the most popular.
Yeah.
The one that's off the wall is the guys from Ad Astra Games who do Birds of Prey and Squadron Strike. They've got, it's the space dog fighting games, whether you're doing it at the squadron level or the individual ship level. They have a custom built web-based platform that allows them to emulate, because what they've done with their tabletop game is they've figured out a way to properly model 3D relationships between aircraft to include pitch, roll, and yaw in a 2D space with the way that you can position the aircraft markers on the map. And they found a way to custom code that into a web-based platform that they call a SCIBI. It is Analog Space Combat by Internet, which is cool. Okay. And they've built this thing custom for themselves. And it's a total nerd thing to do, but we're all nerds, right? I mean, that's sort of
almost a requirement. Yep.
That's who we are. And so that platform does get used quite a bit also. So it's a mix of Tabletop Simulator and Vassal, and which one is more popular in any given year just depends on who happened to submit which events.
Yeah, I guess it would depend on what the GM is fluent in. That would probably be a big help.
Yeah.
And have we reached the point where people that aren't playing in these games can kind of like virtually walk up to the table and watch what's going on?
Yeah. So we ask the GMs or a participant, if the GM isn't comfortable doing it, if they want to stream their game to a YouTube channel, we are all for it. Totally cool. Make it happen. No issue. If they would like to stream it through our channel, there's a few extra gyrations, but we're willing to talk to them and figure out if they want to make that happen. What the majority of them do is they will simply turn on the screen sharing in Discord, because we use the AV chat in Discord, those voice channels in Discord for the games. They will simply turn on a screen share in there. And so you can pop into the room, be polite about it, right? Come in and say, hey, I'm just here to watch for a minute, put yourself on mute. And then you can watch what's going on in the game. And that's pretty cool. 2 years ago, I tried it just as an experiment to see if it would work. And it did. So I did it again this year. I went live from the convention and popped into a handful of the games that were going on. It was the equivalent of, like, at the fall assembly, walking around to the tables with a camera and saying, hey, and now over here on this table, we've got this going on. It was the equivalent of that. I just was popping into Discord rooms. So
you could actually have, at some point, you could have all of these things streamed to one location and then have like an Al Michaels kind of give a play-by-play of what's going on in each room.
Theoretically, yes. I'm not sure you'd know enough about what's going on in each room to really do it. One of the biggest challenges with it is, even if you're on mute on the Discord, there's no good way to just turn the volume down only on the Discord. And so you're minimizing the background voices to allow you to talk over them a little better. That doesn't work real well the way I've got the platform configured right now. Maybe there are some tips or tricks to make it happen. If somebody knows any, please chime in the comments or reach out to them. But what you're describing is theoretically possible, but has some technical hurdles that have to be solved first. How's that?
Which requires time and effort. So, yeah.
Yeah. At some point, I'm sure I will get, the ADHD obsession will kick in, and I'll spend 11 days trying to figure out something that I could probably just Google in 20 minutes and get an answer. Yeah. It's funny you should mention the whole, sort of, I liken it to Baseball Tonight, back when that used to be on ESPN. They'd have the studio show, and whenever something cool would happen, they'd pop into that game, show you what was happening in that game, and then come back to the studio show. And I think it was a little too much studio show and not enough game for people. That is one of the reasons Baseball Tonight fell apart. It was also, they had a lot of talent on those sets, so it got a little expensive. One of the reasons we had originally tagged on our website the category of what's now live events used to be called Wargame Night. And one of the visions that I had when we first fired up the Dragoons, and this isn't something that we talked about on the podcast at the end of last season or anything, I thought it would be really cool to try and get some sort of big movement to where we had lots of folks playing on the same night each week, whether it's Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday afternoon, Wednesday night, whatever. Like, let's just try and get a ton of folks having a regular game night on the same night. But secondary to that, let's have a whole bunch of folks put, just stack the camera up in the corner of the room, point it at the table, and let's play. Similar to what Jim does with Saturday Night Fights, but do it in the real world, not just online. So that each week we'd have somebody as kind of the party host that would pop into a handful of these different games, whether you were tapping into somebody's YouTube live stream or whether you were able to directly connect to the cameras and maybe talk to the folks there for a minute or two, but sort of do this around the country or around the world or around the whatever. Hey, what are you guys playing tonight? Hey, how's the campaign going? Hey, cool. We'll check back with you in about 20, 30 minutes after we talk to some other folks, and have this, one night a week, maybe start at one night a month and then ramp your way up to one night a week or whatever, where for an hour or two, somebody's hosting YouTube show that's sort of popping around, talking to a couple of different gamers in a couple of different places. Hey, how's this campaign going? How's this game going? Hey, we got a question here from Jeff in Indiana. Yeah, I thought that would be kind of fun.
It'd be different. It
would be different, but it would be a bit of a central unifying kind of thing that folks could watch, that wasn't just a talk show, which is what we mainly have right now with Moe's Whiskey Charlie and Gary's Counter Clipping Show and Gary and Dan on the Chit Show and Live Cardboard and whatever else. The War Room, back when that was going, it's broken up and sort of reformed, but Wayne and Judd have one every other Saturday, I think, is when they're on. Cardboard Commander now has a show. You've got the Compass Town Hall. So there's lots of live talk shows, which are cool. I mean, it's a video equivalent of a radio call-in show, which is still cool. It's still fun. But the intent that I had envisioned way back when was more focused on the games. Let's have lots of folks playing games. We'll flip a camera on. We can pop in. Hey, how's it going? Check in on the game. Let them tell, the audience about what's happening. And, cool. We'll come back to you half an hour. We'll pop over to another game and then another game. And then we'll come back and see you in a little bit. And, if you had a couple of gamers around the country willing to do that, then that'd be kind of a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
Which leads into the topic tonight, because that would be one of the things that Wargaming is missing. Maybe not.
I would say it is. Yeah. So, it's funny you should mention that, because the RPG world, which I think you're as familiar with as I am, probably more so, they have those shows where there's actual, they'll sit down and play Dungeons and Dragons, and there'll be a group of people there, and they'll do live plays. And I guess people chat back and forth with these guys. I don't know, because I really don't watch many of them. But that would be kind of cool. Yeah, you could have a regular show where, and maybe you do it like the RPG guys do it, where you're going to get 4 players or however many you need. They're going to meet once a week, once a month, and they're going to play X number of turns of, I don't know, a massive war game.
Well, so they still, the kinds of productions that you're describing, the term that they use in the industry is actual play. So whether it's the folks at Critical Role or Vox Machina or whoever, there's a couple of well-known channels, and then a whole lot of who the hell are they kind of channels that are doing actual playthroughs of RPGs, but they've gotten to the point where the TV production, if you will, right? Most of these are streamed on YouTube, but they're a TV show. The TV production has been jazzed up slightly, where they've got on-screen graphics where you can see the die roll results, or they've got, little avatar things that they'll move around as stuff is happening, whatever. Not like watching the virtual tabletop, but they'll have different things that they'll pop into their screen. If they're in combat and they're doing something, they'll have a little marker pop up in their box on the screen or whatever. It's some fairly snazzy production, but you're watching somebody else's playthrough, and they've provided visual aids to help the audience know what's going on. But I don't think many of those really interact with the audience all that much, in part because I think a lot of those ended up being recorded and then later put online, not necessarily streamed live.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask, because those are productions. That's like producing a TV show. And I would think that you're not going to have a live audience, because there's going to be a hell of a lot of editing to do on something like that.
Yeah, so some of them have done live shows where they put the 6, 8, 10 players up on a stage, and they'll play through it live while everybody else watches. It's not something that I would make a big deal out of watching, but I get it. Some folks enjoy that. I remember one night, so out in my office, I don't have a cable box. I just got a regular HD antenna hooked up, but I get all the little sub channels. I probably get 30 stations out here because I get all the sub channels. One of them, once upon a time a while back, 2 nights a week or 1 night a week or whatever, they used to stream an actual play show that was Will Wheaton as the GM with some of his friends.
I think I vaguely remember that.
Yeah. And so this was free over the air television, and there was, obviously this was, pre-recorded and edited and put together, because they had a multi-camera setup where they're cutting between different angles, but everybody was in the same room. This wasn't everyone playing online through StreamYard or Discord or whatever. This was everybody sitting around a table together, but they were in a studio where they had a half a dozen cameras around.
Yeah.
There's also, you want to talk about getting off the wall. So some of the free ad-supported streaming television, FAST, free ad-supported television, I think is what it is, or free ad-supported streaming TV, whatever it is. The services like Pluto and Tubi and Philo and a couple of those others. There was IMDb had something that got rebranded, and then it got folded into Amazon. It's just another channel on Amazon Prime now. They've got all sorts of different niche channels on these. We have a service that's built into our Samsung TV in the living room that's Samsung digital channels or something like that. One of the digital channels is an all D&D network. I'm not kidding.
I've never heard of that, but
yeah. So they run a couple times a day. They'll run reruns of the old cheesy 80s D&D cartoon. They actually have a D&D themed cooking show. Go figure.
I won't ask.
But several times a day, they've got actual play shows on there. One of the shows is Faster Purple Worm Kill Kill, which the nerds among us will recognize as a ripoff or an homage to the old cheesy kung fu movie Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, which is also where the band got its name. But Faster Purple Worm Kill Kill is an actual play with a live audience. They're all sitting around a table up on a stage, and occasionally has celebrity players in there as well, because some of the episodes I've watched, Matthew Lillard is in. And there's been a couple of other folks you would recognize up on the stage. Now, I don't tend to watch those because, again, actual play I don't find that entertaining for RPGs, because this is where I think wargames and RPGs would differ. For the RPGs, it's a bunch of folks sitting around theater of the mind, talking, discussing, describing. Most of those that I've seen don't tend to have a tabletop with the minis or terrain or anything on there where you've got something to focus the camera on other than just looking at people talking.
Yeah.
That's where I think a wargame show would be different, is that you'd have some people talking, but you put a camera on the table and watch the game happen, which is what Jim and those guys do with Saturday Night Fights.
Well, that's what I was going to say. We do have a virtual version of this, and it is Saturday Night Fights.
Yeah.
It's just not as produced, I guess. The production value there is not like you'd see with some of these other things. And it's virtual. It's not physical.
Well, the production value is non-existent.
Yeah.
And that's not picking on Jim. He's not trying to be, right? He is broadcasting what you see on his table. And so wherever he is moving, whatever he is doing, that is the same screen that you're watching. There's no jumping between different people. They interact with the audience a little bit in the chat, but it's not like StreamYard where they're pulling the chat up on screen that you can see what's going on. You kind of have to be watching the chat to see what they're reacting to, and sometimes it's a bit of a lag. They're very, very rarely taking any time to describe what is happening on the map for the audience.
Yeah. Right.
They're talking to each other. They're telling you what's going on, but you are a fly on the wall watching someone else play a game.
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of the vision that I had a little bit, except, when you first pop in, hey, tell us what's going on. Oh, well, D-Day has just launched and we've got, we're making progress on these 3 beaches, but this one's held up over here and the Rangers are still trying to get up to Pont de Hoc. And, the air cover is not quite as good as it was historically. The Germans have managed a couple of aircraft sorties and blah, give us a quick situation and okay, now we're going to watch your game unfold.
Yeah.
Was what I had in mind.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's probably a good thing this thing didn't take off with me having to be at the, in the control room, because God knows I've done enough other things to myself as it is. It's still something I think would be cool. It's still something I would love to have somebody, pick up and run with from the Dragoons, and I'm willing to provide all sorts of behind the scenes tech support and whatever, but I don't know that I'd want to be the party host for that every week, given all the other stuff that we're doing, like the podcast,
Yeah, no. And I don't think you'd want to do it every week either.
Yeah. And maybe it's something that, you would get a rotating cast and maybe we do it 3 times a month and we've got 3 different people hosting it, but we've got a bunch of the same games we drop into. Or maybe it becomes 3 times a month or 4 times a month, but with 4 different people hosting it, and they're only hosting monthly games. And so you only see each game once a month. There's a lot of different ways you could juggle it, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately some sort of live play. And then my vision wasn't just, hey, let's watch a game unfold, but let's have several games unfolding and let's pop around to different ones and see, because then it looks like a baseball league, but then it looks like a much bigger community movement, more of a hobby, more of a unified thing than just a whole bunch of people kind of woodshedding in their spare room over the garage.
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping for. Longtime fans of the Dragoons, I'm sure, are rolling their eyes and going, oh, geez, Bran, another ridiculous idea. And they're probably right.
That's what I said about the gumball machine, though. So, it's you never know.
So we've had 1 hit in 7.5 years.
It's not bad.
Yeah, fair point. But and the kids are now addicted to the idea of the gumball machine. So this is one of those things that now that it's there, I don't have to do much with it. I can put the kids in charge of it and leave it alone. They're responsible for taking care of this thing now. And so hey guys, where's your gumball machine? Let them worry about it. Again, it's just one of those things that I think, going back to what is Wargaming missing, I didn't intend for this to be the lead thing we were going to be discussing, but You dragged us into it. Good job, Mike.
Well, I mean, but there's so much you could do with that idea, like you said, though, and I think there's so many different ways you could take that. And it's just I won't see it out there. I mean, like I said, Saturday Night Fights is great for what it is, but it's virtual. There's not a physical equivalent of that. We're missing that.
We are. There's not a physical equivalent of it. Even if there was, it would probably only be a single location thing. And one of the things that I think wargaming is missing is visibility as a hobby as a whole. Right, this sort of unifying thread that we're all wargamers at our core, and this is a hobby that we all enjoy and share and want to participate in because it's all voluntary stuff, right? You know, we're talking the hobby wargaming community. We're not talking people that were ordered to do this because they're in uniform. That's a separate group of people that we also talk to, but that's not who we're talking about here. And so, what are the ways in which we can make ourselves more visible to each other and feel more like, you know, the mass group hug of a hobby than everybody kind of, you know, just hiding out in the spare room over the garage and, you know, being in our little silos and on our little islands. And so that was kind of what I had in mind is what are some ways we can more unify those things.
And I'm trying to think the closest physical version of that I can think of. I think Stuka Joe used to, and he may still do it. I think he used to do live play. It's not quite what we're talking about. It was just Stuka himself and a game he's doing, where he's kind of discussing what he's going to do and then he'll do it. But that's not exactly what we're talking about here. Yeah.
And there are some folks that are doing live play and either streaming it or recording it, but they're much like Saturday Night Fights where you're a fly on the wall of someone else's game. Patrick over at Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials every week has 2 or 3 new streams of games where he and somebody else are playing. And much like you do on your channel with your solo games, they play games all the way through to completion. And what that means is they may have things that go 10 or 12 sessions for some of the Civil War games that they've been doing. They've been doing great battles, the American Civil War, working their way through a bunch of them, but they'll do some other games as well. Combat Commander makes an appearance pretty regularly on his channel, but they'll do one where it's 13 episodes and then they'll do the rematch, right? They'll trade sides. They'll play that scenario again.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, it's not a live stream. It's just them playing and recording and then posting it later. Yeah.
But it's live while they're it's live while they're doing it. So I do live plays. It's just I'm the only one there when I'm doing it, and then it gets edited and put up later.
Yeah, there's that. So to me, I think that is one thing that is missing. It's something that I think would be cool to have. I don't know whether that is realistic, but you know, it's much like other things we have described. It is technically feasible. Who wants to tackle it? So that's your headache right there, right? Who wants to actually do it?
A lot of work.
Once upon a time, I thought it would be us. But the other thing that happened was, like, we opened the doors at the end of the summer 2018. And it was just, hey, let's get the site stood up and let's get some consistency to the things we're doing over that first year, right? Let's just build a baseline foundation. We had a bunch of stuff going on the forums. We had a bunch of different stuff we were starting to build for our front page. The podcast took off very quickly after the website opened because we had experience doing podcasts already, and we had the template for that, right? That was relatively easy to get ramped up. But then after that, we started looking at, okay, we got an Origins thing coming up. We started planning our first Dragoons get together. Was supposed to happen in that April, where we were just going to get a bunch of us together. It wasn't going to be like a public event like the Fall Assembly. We were just going to get a bunch of us together for a weekend and do a bunch of war games. And then COVID hit. And so like everything came to a screeching halt because COVID hit. And that kind of kicked our ass. So any thought of doing something like the War Game Night thing I'm describing, where you'd be popping around, eavesdropping on other people's live games. Nobody was playing live games. Everybody was locked down.
Yeah.
So that idea very quickly got backburnered. Would it be cool to have more live games like that happen? Yeah, sure. It would be cool to have other people pick up the idea of Saturday Night Fights and run with it.
Yeah. The other issue is we do not have the number of players, the audience, if you will, that the RPG world would have for something like that either, right? I mean, I don't think you'd see equivalent watch numbers for something like that for a war game versus an RPG. I could be wrong.
Probably not. Certainly not initially, but I mean, keep in mind those RPG actual plays didn't when they started.
That's true.
I think, well, I suspect because there are larger audiences overall for the RPGs, you're going to get a higher ceiling there no matter what.
Yeah.
Just because there's more people playing RPGs than regular war games.
Right.
But I do think there are some ways in which you could visually jazz up the war games in a way that's not necessarily easy to do for the RPGs, especially the way most of the live plays are structured. Away from the idea of, hey, let's do live play-by-play of real games. Is there something else you can think of that might be, this is missing from the wargaming world?
Well, so... Okay, moving away from that, but not too far away from that, kind of, sort of. And it's, the role-playing game world, again, has tools to facilitate play among players online, right? So you've got Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, the Foundry, those kinds of things. Wargamers, we've got Vassal, Tabletop Simulator, and like Rally the Troops. I think we're missing more of those types of tools to allow people to play these games virtually. I think things like Tabletop Simulator, they work, but they need improvement. Vassal works, but it's Vassal and it needs improvement. It's very old. It needs a major update, and they've been talking about it for years. But we need more and better tools to facilitate online play, I think.
Well, one of the key things with Vassal is it's open source.
Right.
And it's free. So that is definitely something that we've got ahead of a lot of the other folks, is that we've got a free platform we can work with. We have technical hurdles are a little bigger, but
it's a free platform, but it's also, there's a lot of, I guess, who holds the rights to allow this to be put up onto whatever tool we're talking about. I think it's a little more open for Vassal for some reason. I don't know why. You see more in Vassal than you do on Tabletop Simulator. And I think some companies don't want their stuff on Tabletop Simulator for whatever reason. You've also got to worry about that.
Some folks prefer one over the other for different reasons. Some folks, I think, are concerned with some piracy issues. I'm not. I think those are a little overblown relative to the level of concern people show. But I also know that it only takes one time of getting your stuff ripped off for you to be pretty gun shy about things.
Yeah,
I understand that. I think there may be more board game platforms than you're giving them credit for. There are some war games on Board Game Arena. They're not the heavy, hardcore, groggy ones from the war game publishers necessarily, but there are some lighter war games that are available on Board Game Arena, which is a pretty good platform for playing online. You mentioned Rally the Troops, Vassal and Tabletop Simulator, the two big ones, obviously. There is Tabletopia, which is another virtual tabletop similar to TTS that has some war game stuff on there. I know Academy Games puts all their stuff on Tabletopia. For some reason, I'm thinking Lock and Load Publishing did for a while. Don't hold me to that if it turns out I'm wrong. I think, but I don't remember for sure. And then for the minis dudes, especially the skirmish mini stuff, a lot of those folks have adapted the RPG platforms, and especially Roll20. They kind of like for that. So
that's interesting. I wonder how adaptable those would be to war games.
Yeah,
it should be, right? You've got your map and dice and maybe some cards.
Yeah. I think it depends on the complexity of the game, obviously. But yeah, there's a certain point at which the graphics of the counters, the overall player interface gets a little complicated for digital implementations. I mean, you've seen some of the stacks that you'll get in OCS games. Those get a little massive, and that makes for an awkward physical interface sitting around a table. When you've got the leaning tower of supplies outside of Kharkov, but adapting that to digital play. So what are some of the things you think are still needed for digital platforms? Is it just more games on the platforms? Is it more easily accessible platforms for players to just sort of grab them and run with? Is it more official things? What do you think the missing element is there?
Well, definitely more games. I think you're going to want to see more, even older games, out of print games, and that's another one is war game missing, but we'll hit that later, I guess. But just more games, and then you need, I think, better interfaces to play these games. Like you mentioned Tabletop Simulator and Vassal. Tabletop Simulator, I prefer it to Vassal, but there are things that it's missing. And one of the things is if you have a stack of 20 counters, and remember Tabletop Simulator, you still have physics to deal with, right? So you could knock a stack of counters over in Tabletop Simulator. You can't do that in Vassal. The other thing you can do in Vassal is you can click on a stack of counters. It'll kind of spread them out and let you see what's in there. That's a lot harder to do in Tabletop Simulator. In fact, I don't really think there's an easy way to do that without unpacking your stack and having to manually repack it. So there's an interface issue.
I think there's a third-party bolt-on you can get for TTS that's like a stack inspector thing that there's a way to do it, but you do have extra hurdles to jump through to put that functionality in there.
Yeah, and I need to look at it again. It's been a while since I've checked that feature. In fact, I just got a notification not too long ago that I think they're getting ready to do a major update to Tabletop Simulator. So maybe it'll be easier to do those kinds of things in. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe. I don't know enough about the technology behind it. And this is going to sound bad, but I haven't really investigated it much. If I want to play a tabletop game, I'd rather just, get out the good old fashioned Mark I table. And use that, instead of having to deal with something. This is not to poo-poo what Jim has done with, Saturday Night Fights at all, because I think he's found a fantastic use for it in terms of the minis games, because the arts and crafts side of that hobby is the big barrier to entry for a lot of folks, with having to build and sculpt the terrain and paint the figures and, base them and all that stuff. And to the people that enjoy that, if that is your jam, man, go for it. I want you to have the most fun you can possibly have with it. It is not something that appeals to me. As impressed as I am with the outcome, the process isn't something that I want. And so what Jim has figured out is how to take the arts and crafts out of the minis games and just play the game,
Yeah.
You've got figures. You don't have to paint 100 figures. You have to paint one and then copy and paste.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is I prefer physical board games, but there's certain physical board games. Mr. President comes to mind. I think Battle for Normandy may be another one that has like 5 maps in it. But there's other games that are so big, I don't have space for them. And so to put them in Tabletop Simulator, they're there and I can play them whenever I want. And the cat's not going to kick the counters over. And it's just, I can actually play this game if it's there.
Yeah.
And if you travel, if you travel a lot, you have access to that game wherever you go too. So it's good for that.
Yeah. And you don't lose your dining room table.
Right. Yeah. Or your marriage.
Yeah. It's set up right where you left it. Yeah. I think so. It's not that we lack digital platforms. It's that the on-ramps may be a little more challenging and the content we want on them might not always be there. Is that kind of
well, that's part of it. I still think you could have different platforms that were geared strictly towards wargaming, maybe some other board games in there, but so you could do something like have it read in the rules. So that it's kind of checking the rules as you play. So that's one less thing you have to worry about. Or maybe it's something that you kind of can look up through some kind of online, ask about a rule and have it spit something back out to say, hey, this is what this rule says, if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Things that could check, line of sight, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Some of those things are built into Tabletop Simulator, but not the rules piece that you're describing. I think that's one of the key things is that between Vassal and TTS, Vassal enforces the rules. Like you can build in the rules enforcement. It doesn't necessarily teach you the rules. There may not be a great lookup tool, but it allows you to play with the rules enforced as a part of the module. Whereas TTS does not enforce the rules at all, right? So you can, if you've got a unit that's limited to 4 movement points, there's nothing stopping you from moving it 12 movement points worth of movement because it doesn't do any rules enforcement.
Right.
The flip side of it is if somebody coded the Vassal module wrong, you're stuck with it. Whereas that's not the case in Tabletop Simulator. You just look in the rule book and go, oh, it says I can do this. Well, let me go do that. So.
Yeah. Well, and that's, one of the reasons why I like Tabletop Simulator over Vassal is because you're playing just like you would if you were sitting at the table playing. And so if I'm trying to teach somebody a game, I'm going to use Tabletop Simulator because whatever I show them is what they're going to see when they're trying to learn this game at home. If you try to teach somebody through Vassal, and there are people who do, a lot of people actually who do teach intro games through Vassal, and they do a good job of it. But the problem is Vassal does a lot of scripting, and one of its biggest selling points is it automates a lot of the stuff that goes on in these games. Yeah, that's great, but if you're trying to teach somebody something, they've got to see what's going on. You can't just press a button and have this automation stuff take over. People want to see so what have I got to do here exactly? So
yeah, it's that fine line between computer game versus digital implementation of the board game.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you try to learn like Saratoga that just came out digitally, you're probably, if you want to play the physical board game, just learn it that way. I don't think you're going to learn it by playing the digital version.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Have we beat the virtual tabletops to death? Are we ready to move on to?
We've probably lost 2 of our 3 listeners, so probably we got to find something else.
Season 16 of Mentioned in Dispatches is underway, and we couldn't do it without our Patreon supporters, and especially the regimental captains at the top level. The Armchair Dragoons would like to thank Chris Anthony, James M., Joseph Knorr, Paul LaFontaine, Miles R., Stagger Wing, Fred's Dog, and Fred 2, Kevin Bertram, Michael Sunborg, Patrick Garrity, Catastrophe Games, Hethwell War Games, and Greg from Pico Armor. They help us keep our objectives in our line of sight. You too can support the Regiment of Strategy Gaming as a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/armchairdragoons.
Did you have something else in mind off the top of your head? You want me to?
Well, I'll let you go. I'll let you do another one. I'll let you do one, then I'll try to think of something else.
So some folks listening to this may be news. Other folks that are following along with more stuff, this won't be. But now that the initial previews are starting to come out, I know Mo posted one on his channel that we have shared in Tuesday Newsday. Mo posted a preview ahead of the Kickstarter launch for YA Magazine number 16. Flying Pig Games is bringing back YA Magazine. They're going to kickstart the next issue. And the kind of back page column in YA Magazine for the longest time had been written by Peter Perla. Peter Perla passed away a year and a half ago now. We may be up to 2 years now. And so Peter's obviously not writing that. Mark reached out and asked if I would take over Peter's column for YA Magazine. And if it had been taken over for anybody but Peter, probably wouldn't have done it. But Peter was, I didn't know him well, certainly not as well as some of the other folks that I work with on the professional side, but I always loved and respected Peter's point of view and his passion for the hobby and everything. In addition to his professional credentials, when you talk about the guy that literally wrote the book on wargaming, it is literally wrote the book on wargaming, right? His book, The Art of Wargaming, had been around for a while. So I was pretty touched by Mark offering that to me and him and Denver having the faith in me to do that. So I said, all right, I'll take it. I bring that all up as a precursor to the first column that I wrote was called Ecosystem. And it's a little bit about what are the things in the wargame hobby ecosystem, kind of comparing where we were in what a lot of people think of as the golden age of wargaming, the 70s and 80s, before TSR had bought SPI, basically. So from the late 60s up until the early 80s when that buyout happened. And you could probably even go into the late 80s while GDW was still doing a lot of war games, up until around the time Avalon Hill started to fall apart. Some people would even push it that far up. So what were some of the things I had talked about as the ecosystem? And I'm not going to give away the column because you're supposed to go buy the magazine and read the dang column there. But part of what I talked about is what are the things that are more hobby wide? And so when I'm thinking, as I was conceptualizing this episode of what is wargaming missing, first of all, I expected YA number 16 to be a lot closer to out than it actually ended up being, where they're waiting to kickstart. It's probably not going to be available to the public until late February, early March. I was expecting it to have been out or imminent by now. I was looking at the stuff that we do or don't have across the whole hobby compared to what was around back then. And 2 of the examples I use are conventions and magazines. And taking the second one of those, the magazine piece of it, the General was always a house organ, and GDW's Challenge magazine was mostly a house organ. But Space Gamer and Fantasy Gamer from Steve Jackson was not just focused on Steve Jackson stuff. And the Dragon magazine was not just focused on TSR stuff. There would be articles in support of TSR's products in the Dragon, but they reviewed and provided content for a ton of stuff across the hobby. What's interesting is if you go back to the Dragon magazines, the early ones, like, sub number 30, they had ASL scenarios in there. There was one in the late 50s, early 60s, issue numbers, not years, right? Obviously, that had rules for Napoleonic skirmishes in the Peninsula campaign. I mean, there was legit wargame content in the Dragon back then. There was one issue that had a big multi-article support for the System 7 Napoleonics, which was GDW's attempt to make a board game out of minis games. And I think wargaming lacks that big flagship non-house organ magazine. Paper Wars at this point has basically become the Compass Games house organ, and that's fine. That's cool. Go do that. S&T is still out there, and it's still a big deal, but there's a lot of S&T that, in part because of its quarterly publication, still very much feels like a history magazine that happens to have some game stuff in it, right? If you've read S&T or World at War magazine lately, there's not near as much game content. It's a lot of history content with some, with a game in there. And that's not knocking it. They're making a living doing it, right? And they're cranking out 4 issues a year of each of those. That's nothing to turn your nose up at. That's a fairly impressive track record, especially for the number of years they've been doing it. Yam magazine does try to cover much more of the hobby than just Flying Pig stuff, which is cool. But Flying Pig is still a relatively small publisher. They're not a big publisher. They'd love to be bigger, and Yam magazine could eventually turn into that. Who knows? But what the board wargaming hobby doesn't have is something similar to what you find in the minis world, which there's a lot of different minis magazines, but there's only 2 or 3 that would be in, probably 2 that are in competition for the flagship one. There's Wargame Soldiers and Strategy, and there's Wargames Illustrated. And those 2 have pretty significant circulation. They're sold through a lot of outlets. Wargames Illustrated magazine is its own publication, but you can also order it through Warlord Games. So you could order a box of bolt action minis and some custom dice and the latest version of the rules or a particular army book, and you can pick up Wargames Illustrated magazine while you're at it. You can get it from the On Military Matters bookstore. You can get it for the online bookstore that we also carry their weekly newsletter and Tuesday Newsday. You can get Wargames Illustrated magazine through a whole lot of people that sell minis on top of the getting it directly from the publisher. War Diary magazine is a good magazine and has interesting articles in it that are not single publisher specific, but you get it directly from the War Diary magazine guys, or you don't get it at all. It's not something you find on the shelves in a game store anywhere. Battles magazine kind of could have turned into that if Olivier had kept it going. It certainly visually had the appeal for it, but I don't know that it ever got the market penetration needed to be a true flagship magazine for the hobby. And maybe we're just past the point where any sort of flagship magazine would matter, because so many people are getting their daily fix from all of the different content creator sites that are out there that would otherwise be providing, the folks that used to write for Moves and Fire and Movement and S&T and the General and all those other magazines are now writing their own personal blogs.
Yeah.
So, maybe the idea of the flagship magazine is just a dinosaur that I need to let go. But I do think having something like that for the hobby as a whole that gives everyone a common touchstone to reference. We can all talk about, hey, did you see this article in the magazine? And we've all read it because we've all seen it because it is the magazine. In some cases, it sort of sets the agenda for what are we talking about. This is the cool new game. Hey, a good review in this magazine really sets your game up for long-term success. Hey, support from these guys covering your convention or an interview with a designer because of how widely read it is can have a positive impact on you as a publisher or designer or a convention or whatever. It would be nice to have something like that again. I just don't know if it's realistic in this day and age.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like forums. We talk all the time about, we love the forum, but it's really, and newspapers too, I guess. But it's that information now is just instantaneous. And so, I still like to read a magazine if I can once in a while. I subscribed not too long ago to, I think it was Military Images. It was Civil War era photographs. And it was great. Oh. You get, every quarter you get a magazine that has some photos from the Civil War and that time period and the story to go with it. And it was great. But it's a magazine, and can you look these things up online? Maybe. And I get what you're saying, and I would probably subscribe to that magazine you're talking about that doesn't exist if it exists.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is a technology component to this in that, the newspapers dying had as much to do with classified ad revenue as anything else, but newspapers gave you the immediacy of this is what happened yesterday that matters. In the case of the old evening newspaper, this is what happened earlier today that matters. You get that instantly now, right? That alert pops up on your cell phone instantly. But there's magazines like The Atlantic or Slate never went away. They're still popular, and in some cases, circulation went up on a couple of things like that. Wired magazine isn't going away just because you can get tech news on your phone instantly. The kinds of things that they write about are not, oh my God, I need to know this right now. It's the deeper dive and the more meaningful long form approach to something.
Yeah,
I think
that's true.
there's space for that in the hobby that the technology won't hurt. What I wonder is whether or not the hobby is too fragmented for that flagship to have enough meaning.
Yeah.
And back when the General and, the Dragon and Challenge and Space Gamer were all out there were probably as many games in circulation in the history of wargaming in 1974. From the start of wargaming to 1974, you had as many games or probably fewer games published than have been published just since COVID.
Yeah.
And so what are the games you talk about? What are the things that matter in that flagship magazine that you're actually going to get everybody buying and paying attention to? I think that's your bigger challenge, is the fragmentation of the audience, everybody off in their own little silos. Again, going back to everybody's found their niche and they just want to live in the niche and they're not worried about being a part of the bigger movement. That magazine may not have the audience, not for technology reasons, but for siloing reasons.
Yeah, maybe. It depends too on what types of articles that are going to be in that magazine. And are you going to do like the General used to do and do a few reviews and have a few strategies, how to approach a game or something like that? The content you're talking about for a magazine, I agree. It's something that you don't need to know instantly. Like, so somebody releases Here I Stand, an article about the game maybe, but then the history behind it. I mean, there's a lot of people, wargamers, I think, most wargamers, I would think, love history. And so if you're going to write an article about, what is this game Here I Stand about? Let's take a dive into see what this time period really involved. I'm going to want to read that. It's like the designer's notes in the game itself, because I'm a big history guy, and those kinds of articles, then I think people are going to be more willing to subscribe to a magazine like that, where you can get war game adjacent information into the game you're playing, right? So it's going to depend on what articles are in this magazine that would draw the silos that you're talking about. Because if I'm playing miniatures in that time period, I'm probably still going to want to read about Here I Stand because the history's there and I want to check that out,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think all of that is relevant. Yeah, I just, maybe, look, part of this is Brant loves magazines because that's what Brant grew up with. And damn it, why don't we have what Brant grew up with anymore? So I understand that I'm not discounting the nostalgia factor that really only applies to us old farts and that the 23-year-olds couldn't give less than a shit about. Like, I get that. The stock answer for why not a magazine is, who the hell needs a magazine? We got websites. But I think the kinds of things, even among the websites, we're very siloed and stovepiped. And even the year in wargaming survey that we did in December, hey, tell us about 2025 for you in wargaming. There's a handful of questions we ask every year, right? Did you play more or less? Did you spend more or less? How many, did you go to any conventions? That kind of stuff. But we'll swap a couple of questions out each year. Just, hey, let's go ask something new. And this year, we put probably 30 different content creator channels, including my own worst enemy. We had the Dragoons, obviously, but folks like Ardwolf and Mo and Gimpy Gamer and Player's Aid. And, Wayne, yes, Wayne, you were in there. Hissy Cat, but also some of the professional side of things, right? Pack Sims and Wargame Weekly and a couple of those. And we were asking folks, how often, if at all, do you read these? None, a couple times a year, a couple times a month, weekly, or I'm subscribed, right? Subscribed means you get notified when something is published, not that you had to go looking for it. And what you saw across most of these The Player's Aid was the only channel of all of them where subscriptions exceeded none. There were a bunch of them where subscription plus weekly exceeded the percentage of none, but there were way more sites of the 30 something we listed probably. And you guys can go look this up on the site and see the chart there. There were, and I didn't post the percentages of none because I didn't want anybody looking bad really, but there were only, I think 3, maybe 4 sites total where none, like never checking it at all, was below 40%. Like the vast majority of those, 40% or more of the audience never hit those sites or those channels, right? A lot of them are YouTube channels.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about where would that flagship be, the reason I don't think it's a technological issue is that there isn't the flagship website either. Right. Player's Aid's probably the closest you get, in part because of how much content those guys churn out. I mean, they are machines. They're
robots, yeah.
Stuff they churn out. They're the content creator equivalent of David Thompson or Gregory Smith in the number of those guys spit out. But the fact that there was no overwhelming favorite for where to find the content indicated to me that this isn't a technology thing. This is a fragmented audience thing.
Well, but like the Player's Aid, they churn out a lot of content, but it's all the same type of content. They're not doing strategies, how to approach this war game and how can you win this war game. It's more of reviews and unboxings and those kinds of things. So, I mean, is there a big site that would be more like the magazine you described that would have these articles? I mean, Armchair Dragoons comes to mind, but even Armchair Dragoons, I don't think has that same type of article content that the magazine would have.
No. And look, I would love for us to be able to have more of that, but we're also working with a volunteer writing staff, right?
Yeah.
The little bit of money that we get come in through the Patreon supports the operations of the site, whether it's me, boxing stuff up to mail to everybody or covering our StreamYard costs or our web hosting costs. What we get in from that basically keeps the lights on and keeps the team running. A published magazine ideally would have a payroll to pay folks to do stuff. And so that does 2 things. One, you're going to have people a little more motivated to do a wider variety of things instead of just what feels like what happens to come to mind or what they feel like writing about. But 2, at that point, you've got a little bit of a lever to assign something to somebody, right? Hey, this month I need you to write X. And because you are employed by us and paid by us,
you're out of here.
Yeah, you're going to go write X, right? And that's not the statement that you have, but the understanding is, hey, I work for you, therefore I am going to take the assignment you give me, not just the thing I'm volunteering to do, which is what for our writing team being all volunteers, they're pretty damn good. I mean, they really put a lot of thought and concern into this, which they don't have to, they all choose to, which is fantastic. I love it. But this isn't a paycheck for those folks.
No, it's a labor of love. I mean, it's
I'd love to get, more of that kind of content that you're describing, in part because it's, it just increases the overall content count. But, we're going to take what the writers are willing to provide.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple of folks who are like, nah, man, I'm going to write some reviews and that's it. That's all I'm interested in doing. All right, cool. Like, you're good at it and you like doing it and you want to continue providing it. I am happy to give you the outlet. So that said, there's nothing like having the physical thing in your hand.
Yeah.
Right. And reading it on a Kindle ain't the same.
No, it's not. I read a lot of books digitally, but I still prefer holding a book in my hand. It's just, I don't know. And like you said, maybe it's because of that age where that's what we did, but there's just something about it.
Yeah. We're not going to get into the details of like the generational differences there, because that's a whole separate series of podcasts, right?
That's another podcast. There you
go. All right, Mike, you were thinking, what else you thinking that what are we lacking? What are we missing? What don't we have?
It's a tough one. One thing I would love to see that we really don't, that I haven't seen, I'll just say I haven't seen this so much, maybe a little bit. And I would love to see more like the conventions we go to. I would love to see more like just introduction to wargaming sessions for people. that, a lot of people say we need to bring more people into wargaming. Well, why don't we set up instead of running a game from 1 to 3, we're going to run an intro to wargaming. And if you've never played a war game, come to this and we'll kind of show you, we'll pick an easier to play war game and take you through what it is and talk about why we like it. And here's typical rules and a typical game. And this is it. And maybe get some more people.
Summer Origin, BB Mike's Intro to Wargaming.
Yeah, and people to run these things, right? But that'd be nice to see, and not just Origins, but any wargame convention that we talk about.
Well, I think for what you're describing, you don't want to go to the wargame conventions. That's where people already know how to play war games. You're not going to do that session at Consum World Expo. You would do that session at Buckeye Game Fest, at Mace, at Tantrum Con, at Liberty Con.
Well, but you could do it at these wargame conventions because it's you have these conventions throughout the entire world. It's what's closest to you, right? So if you're going to do a historical minis convention somewhere, you can say, oh, and by the way, if you're interested in learning about this, we're going to have an open session from whenever to whenever, and drop by and we'll answer questions and show you what we do. I mean, I know that people that are in like train clubs, model railroading, I've been to things where they do that, where they'll say, come on in, we'll show you what this is all about.
Yeah.
And I guess I just haven't seen that for wargaming.
I think a difference there is that you have an actual fixed location for the model train club that you don't always have for the wargaming folks, right? The model train club has a street address.
Well, yeah, but that's what I meant by the conventions. I mean, they're for the most part in fixed locations. If it's strictly a wargame convention, it's going to be in Columbus, Ohio, or wherever it's going to be.
Yeah, but the model train folks, when they do hey, stop by and learn something about this, that sort of open house day, I don't think they're usually charging at the door for that. Whereas the game convention, just to even get in the door and make it to the table of, hey, learn about wargaming, there's a cost just to get in the door.
Well, that's true. For some conventions, you would have to pay just to get in the door. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the open house idea is a cool one. I wonder if it's not something that could be structured through some other kinds of locations, like a public library sort of thing. Just because they have space, there's no barrier to entry. You just got to be able to get to the library, but you can do something like that through one of those.
Yeah.
That's just a place. Maybe you could do them at a local museum if particularly at the history tie-in. The kinds of people likely to be at the history museum are the kinds of people that might be likely to check out a war game.
Or the battlefields or
the battlefields. Yeah. Those kinds of things. So that could be an idea.
Camden, South Carolina later this year, right?
Don't spill the beans too early. But yes, possibly.
Well, it's the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War is why I bring that up. Yeah.
Well, there is that. That is, you are correct, sir.
But yeah, I mean, it's all these things we're throwing out there need obviously a lot more thought, right?
Well, yeah, certainly more than we're going to squeeze into the podcast here. That's for sure.
It's kind of the topic, what is missing in war games is, well, we don't really know. So how can we talk about it? Because they're missing, right?
Well, but if there are things we once had and now need to bring back, there is that. So, in some cases, something like the flagship magazine that is missing from wargaming, that is something that we kind of once had and is now gone. So could we bring that back?
Yeah.
Other things like the sort of whip around baseball tonight of live wargaming events, that's not something we ever had. That's something that, grabbing from another industry altogether and saying, hey, I wonder if this would work. What could we get? Is that something we could pull off? Who knows? So, as we're talking about what's missing, there may be things that we're grabbing from somewhere else that might work, or bringing back something we once had, and maybe that might work. Who knows? So.
Yeah, and one thing I always tout that we're missing is bring all the out-of-print war games, the rare out-of-print war games, and put them on PDF at least so we can have access to them.
You've been banging that drum for a while, man.
Yeah, and that drum, I might as well put it away because it ain't ever going to happen.
Don't sell yourself short. I mean, have you bought any lottery tickets lately?
Are you? Yeah, that's true.
I mean, if no, then yes, go back to selling yourself short.
It's like Gary Ardwolf says, if I win the lottery, I am going to open up a war game store, and it's going to be a place where you can come play war games and buy war games, and I will have the money to lose on that.
Yeah. That does bring up the idea of, is this is more of a hobby thing than just a war game thing, but could be applicable to war game stuff in particular. If you think about the retail marketplace, you have grocery store chains, you have clothing store chains, you have electronic store chains. There's no game store chain, right? There's GameStop, but that for video games, you got GameStop, you know, some of those pop culture collectible kind of thing. But you don't have a tabletop or board game chain that is a truly national sort of thing. Now, there are the pop-up the game store shops that show up around the holidays that are owned by the same people that put the calendar kiosks up in the malls every year in November, that you'll get those pop-up board game shops that in some cases have some great deals, but are much broader pop culture kinds of stores. There is the chain of Game Castle stores that is literally coast to coast, because there's one in Greenville, South Carolina. There's another one in Santa Clara, California. And there's a half a dozen of them around the country. But there's no war game chain anywhere. There's no multi-location war game store chain that is a truly national thing. At one point, there were about a half a dozen complete strategist stores around the country, because there's the one in New York. There was one in DC. I think there's still one just outside of Philadelphia, but don't hold me to that. But you don't have a war game. You know, if you could stand up a war game chain and anchor it to a handful of the larger markets where wargaming is common and popular, you're looking at obviously a bunch of the big cities, right? DC, New York, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, LA, San Francisco kind of stuff. There are plenty enough wargamers in Columbus, Ohio to support one. There's plenty enough wargamers in Phoenix to support one. There's plenty enough wargamers in Dallas to support one. There's enough wargamers here in the Raleigh area that Gamers Armory and Hangar 18 Hobbies are both able to stay open. What would it take to have a chain of wargame focused stores? The kind of store you're talking about, lots of wargames on shelves, some table space to play, some regular events where folks can come play. Obviously, this has to be located in a place where the population density would support it, and you would absolutely have to have a reasonable amount of online retail to support it as well. But you've been to Gamers Armory. There's a truckload of wargaming in there, but it is not a wargame only store. Right. And a significant population of the people taking up game tables in the back are there for Friday Night Magic and Sunday afternoon Pokemon.
Yeah.
So
and I think that's how you'd have to run it. You couldn't run a chain store like you're talking about that just sold war games. It just wouldn't work.
I suspect you are correct.
Unless you limited it to you're going to have 20 stores in the big cities, like you said. And even then it'd be iffy.
Well, but I think that's where you start, and whether or not wargaming gets to be a big enough deal, or in part, how broadly do you define wargaming? Are you going to include the minis guys alongside the tabletop guys? Goes a long way towards what merchandise shows up on your shelf. And are you talking just historicals? Because if you're going to go outside of just historicals, you make a good living just selling 40K stuff, right? Yeah. Truthfully, I mean, just the economics of it say, yeah, you could do that. So what are the options that you could legitimately try to survive doing? And I don't know. You know, this is sort of me throwing it out to the audience for somebody that might know. What would it take to do that? But I think, you know, again, when we talk about things that wargaming is missing, the common thread that you're going to see from me is stuff that cuts across the entire hobby, stuff that everybody knows about and has a bit of a touchstone to, and things that provide visibility and sort of that sense of belonging beyond just the same 5 dudes you've been playing war games with since 2000. And would a national chain of stores bring that about? I don't know. Maybe.
Well, we're going to let you take that on the Shark Tank and pitch that idea and see how much investments you can get to start that.
I'm pretty sure the answer is no. I doubt you'd make it past the audition phase of that one.
You would not get past the audition phase, no.
Yeah, so it's something that I think is a very long road to hoe there. Who knows? Maybe not. I don't know.
It's a lottery dream. That's what you got to win the lottery to open up your war game store.
I'd get my ass kicked if I tried that. I absolutely would. So I'll say this though. I am curious what the audience thinks. And so audience chime in, whether it's in the comments or, whether it's the comments on the YouTube play of this or any of the different platforms where you can find us, or just at the bottom of the episode here on our site, or pop into the forums and offer your thoughts. But what do you think the wargame hobby as a hobby is missing? And what do you think it would do for the hobby? How do you think we would need to bring it about? Like, what, first of all, are we off our rockers? Like, do you agree or disagree with the things we're throwing out there? If you agree, like, how would you propose making one of those things happen? If you think there's something else that's more important that we hadn't mentioned, or something that you think is meaningful that we haven't mentioned, like, how would you bring it about? Like, what would you do? Because
I gotta be honest here. I feel like we're missing something. I feel like we've missed something.
Oh, I guarantee we've missed stuff. The flagship wargaming convention these days is probably CSW Expo. Doesn't even bring in 4 figures worth of people. But folks look back and they go, oh man, back when Origins was a wargame convention, it only brought in 4,000 people. If you go back and look at the Origins reports from like 80, 81, 82, it's 4,000 people. And the number of wargame events in the program, because you go back and you look at the old like registration event lists from back then, it's about the same number of wargame events that we're doing at the Wargame HQ these days.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little more than that. If you added us and HMGS together, you've got about the number of official wargame events at Origins in 79, 80, 81, 82 timeframe. You only had 4,000 people there though. So that percentage of wargame events, that ratio of wargame event to attendee was very high. Today, you got 19,000 people running around out there, right? The population has gone up 500%. The number of wargame events has not. Yeah, and that's why people go, there's no wargaming there anymore. The fuck there isn't. Like, there's plenty of wargaming. It's just everything else has exploded.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I this is not to say, suck it up and go there anyway. Like, that's not what I'm trying to say. You don't want to show up and deal with, 15,000 people that aren't interested in what you're there for. I get that. Like, I could absolutely understand that. And somebody says, nah, man, the cost and the headache is not worth it to me and I don't want to deal with it. Cool. Like, I'm totally fine with that. I understand why you would feel that way. I will not acquiesce to people speaking untruths about it, right? To say there's no wargaming there is false on its face. But, that is also, there's, to say it about Gen Con probably is more accurate. There's a lot fewer wargame companies there anymore. But what would that flagship wargaming convention be anymore? There's a handful of house conventions, Compass Expo and GMT's Weekend at the Warehouse kind of stuff. But CSW Expo doesn't even bring in 1,000 people. Yeah. Are we missing the flagship wargame convention that becomes the absolute must attend?
I think it's called Fall. I think it's called Fall Assembly. I think it's starting to become that.
Well, but part of what made those conventions a big deal back then is that was the chance that you got to directly interact with the company. Yeah. You get that 24/7 now, whether through all the different online tools that we have to interact with each other, whether they are people's websites directly or the Compass Town Hall or, email to the company or whatever. Like, you get way more direct lines to the companies. They don't have to wait until a special event to make a splash with an announcement about something. A lot of the things that they used to use conventions before, they don't need the convention for anymore. That's fair. I get that.
Yeah, but how cool is it to go to Origins though and have Herman Luttman teach you how to play Plum Island Horror? I mean,
absolutely. There is a fellowship functionality at in-person game conventions that you don't get online. Yeah, we try to replicate it with the ACDC. It's still not perfect. It's better than nothing, but it's not the ideal. So
no, it's going to be a different experience. It's just by default.
Yeah. I don't want it to sound like we're whining, but we are kind of whining a little bit, right? Damn it, why don't we have this anymore? But it almost feels like we're sort of starting this season on a negative note. Pull us out of the death spiral here, Mike.
Next week on Mentioned in Dispatches, Old Man Yells at Cloud.
We tend to do a lot of that, but that's because that's who we are.
No, it's a good question to ask, and like I said, I feel like we're missing something, and this is the podcast where we're really hoping to get some feedback to let us know what we've missed, and maybe we'll address it on a future podcast.
Yeah, that's we'll see what we can do with that. look, if you got suggestions for podcast topics, man, throw those at us too. Who knows? Some of the things we do have coming up this season, our next episode, we're going to be talking about Buckeye Game Fest, which is it's a lot earlier in the season because Buckeye Game Fest happens a lot earlier this year. So we're having to have that conversation earlier to give people time to, make plans if they choose to attend. We're going to have a couple of different practitioner-focused episodes because we also have Connections Online coming up in April, and we're co-sponsors of that one. And this is the 5-year anniversary of Connections Online also because we started in 2021. So this is the 5-year anniversary of that, and we're going to, take a look back on what's evolved of that and, where we've been, where we're going, that kind of stuff. We do have our usual end of the season convention look ahead at what's going to be going on in the summer and fall so people can start making some plans for that. In between, we've got a couple of surprises here and there, a couple of special guests making some special announcements. We can't give too much away, but we're going to have a couple of different things going on. I know there's a couple of publishers that have things on Kickstarter now or will be launching them soon, and so those games should be coming due, quite frankly, by the end of the season based on those folks' previous fulfillment timelines. So it may be that we're going to have some conversations with people for the launches of their products, and so that would be kind of cool if we can make that happen. So, Mike, blue sky it. If we could have one guest of any kind, anybody in the wargaming world to come on and talk about a particular topic, who would you bring on and what would you have them talk about?
Man, that's being put on the spot because there's so many names come to mind. I mean,
it is, but I got 2 or 3 empty episodes toward the end of this season that I still need to fill in. So if you tell me what to shoot for, I know who to go ask.
And I know that all those people I'm thinking of, none of them would agree to come on Mitch and Dispatch's podcast.
That is fair, and there's probably training orders involved that would prevent us from even contacting them. But don't let that stop you, man. Maybe we can fool them into appearing. We put some voice changers on. So
yeah, bribe them with money or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, as you think of something, let me know because again, we've still got. You're the co-host, dude, and we've still got a couple empty spots. So
well, we are looking for. Recommendations for topics, like you said. If anybody has anything you'd love to hear us talk about, let us know. We do request sometimes.
Well, for starting with a pretty sparse agenda, we managed to squeeze over an hour out of this, and we did it without Ozarski bothering to show up.
That's true, and this was a tough topic. I think one of the tougher ones we've had.
Well, a little by design,
because I don't know what I'm missing, and to talk about that, it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah. Make you think about it.
Pretty good job, though. Yeah,
we're going to make you think about it. All right, audience, you've got your marching orders. Give us some feedback on what Wargaming is missing, and then also, give us some thoughts as a whole on what else we should have in the Wargaming world. And in the meantime, we will catch you next time on another episode of Dispatches.